Hey guys, Dr. Israetel here for Renaissance Periodization into our raw powerlifting priorities training videos, and we're here to talk about priority number 1, which is specificity. Specificity tops our priorities, of which there are 6 basic ones. It scores ahead of overload, fatigue management, SRA, variation, and phase potentiation. And to give you guys a visual perspective of what this sort of means, specificity can't even be included, in my opinion, on a sort of percent contribution chart like this one to the importance of the principles, sort of how we had for the diet principles, because specificity very much outlines the direction of all these other ones. For example, if you presented overload by running 20 miles a day, 15 miles the next, 25 miles the day after that, real challenging stuff. If you manage fatigue by doing light runs and doing some cycling work every now and again, if you are appropriately dealing with SRA by not having crazy heavy or hard runs all the time, and if you're doing variation, etc., phase potentiation by building an aerobic base, you've done everything right. But what sport is this? Not powerlifting. That sounds more like triathlon or marathon running. So specificity points us into the right direction and then allows for the expression of all the other really important training principles. So let's really sort of more scientifically define what specificity actually means. Technically, all body systems adapt in the direction of the training stimulus that is presented. And interestingly enough, if the training stimulus is too varied from one time point to another, there can actually be counteracting adaptations. Becoming really good at one thing can sometimes interfere with becoming really good at another. That's the basic definition of specificity. So what does it really imply for raw powerlifting? Training for raw powerlifting should mostly, very much for the most part, focus on actually only 3 things. Number 1, not necessarily in order of importance, is to add size to the powerlifting muscles, to get bigger muscles. Number 2 is to make those big muscles stronger. And number 3 is to practice the technique for the powerlifting lifts. If your training, in a large sense, is avoiding any 3 of those, or all 3 of them, it might not be as specific to powerlifting as we need, and you might be leaving some pounds on the platform. To that end, what are some bad ideas that kind of reflect that reality if you're straying too far away from being powerlifting specific in your training? Lots of cardio, probably the worst mistake. Doing cardio directly and indirectly inhibits and interferes with strength and size development. If you want to not get as strong as you can, not get as big as you can, and possibly go over the top and get weaker, lots of cardio is the way to do it. So if a powerlifting program has lots of cardio in it, it's probably a really bad idea. And there are a variety of physiological mechanisms for this, particularly AMP kinase versus mTOR competition in actual cellular signaling. All right. Number 2, funky movements. If the movements are not specific to powerlifting or to making powerlifting muscles stronger or bigger, they probably don't work all that well. Kettlebell swings, I'm not sure what they're for. One-arm cable pushdowns are for pro bodybuilders that want to bring up one arm versus the other. Not for 120-pound gym bros, had to get that one out there. And also probably not for powerlifters who are going to be benching hundreds of pounds. I don't know how much a one-arm cable pushdown carries over to that. And last but not least, just an example, the tsunami bar. If you can figure out what that bar does, I'll hand over my PhD to you or something like that, all right? Weird stuff, funky movements, probably don't accomplish a whole lot in terms of making you bigger, stronger, or technically better at powerlifting. Last but not least, training useless muscles or muscles that are largely useless for being good at powerlifting or in crazy high rep ranges. So if you're doing a lot of calf work, medial delt work, bicep work in your program, and if you're doing any reps over 10, that starts to be questionable. There may be a time to do some reps every now and again that are greater than 10 in powerlifting, but if you're doing that regularly, that's probably not a good thing. You're not building the fast twitch motor units and fibers that you need to be really good at the sport to be truly strong. On the other hand, some good ideas with regard to specificity. Sticking to the basics is almost always a good idea, all right? That means most of your training movements should be the power lifts or their close derivatives. For example, the JM press for pressing derivative, front squatting for getting better at squats, and stiff-legged deadlifts as a hamstring and lower back strengthening movement. Using heavy weights. I know it's crazy to hear that I have to say that powerlifting is about heavy weights, but you see some people's training programs and you think, well, I don't even know what they're training for anymore. Focusing on more weight in low to moderate rep ranges is the meat and potatoes of powerlifting. I'll put it this way. If you're getting stronger doing sets of 5s, things are going to go real well for you in the sport. If you're not getting stronger regularly in sets of about 5 reps, I can't guarantee your progress will continue. Assistance work should be done for the right muscles, and that's a very good thing. Assistance work is just fine. In powerlifting, if you're working on getting a bigger chest, bigger triceps, and stronger triceps, big quads and a big posterior chain, minus the calves of course, good things are probably going to come from that. Just by growing your chest, triceps, quads, and posterior chain, and then strength training them in sets of 3 to 5 later, you can experience very good success in powerlifting. So it doesn't always have to be sets of 1 to 2, up to sets of 10 is fine, but it has to be in the right musculature. All right, and sort of some real-world tips to drive the point home for today. Powerlifting training must in some way, for the most part, be about growing muscle, the right muscles, getting stronger, or getting good at powerlifting technique. If some element of your training does not address that, that's probably not optimal. Now, rehab and flexibility training or work or what have you, whatever you want to call it, is an obvious exception to this rule. But it must be understood that we have to keep those ideas separate. When you're rehabbing, rehab. When you're training, train. If we catch you in the gym doing an exercise and go, hey, is that for rehab? Are you hurt? Or are you preventing injury? Or is that for training? And you can't give a clear answer, your training might not be directed enough, not specific enough to powerlifting. It could get better if you thought through some things, maybe got rid of some things and put some other things in. If you find a powerlifting program that exhibits the following qualities, it might be a good idea to stay away from it because it might have some serious flaws. And here they are. If a program has you consistently, for extended periods, lifting light weights in the 10+ rep range, it's probably not optimal for powerlifting. If you're consistently using movements that are weird, non-core moves, all sorts of funky movements that are supposed to do some kind of really exotic thing, they probably don't do a whole lot. And of course, if you're avoiding the core movements, if you're doing a powerlifting program and you haven't done a pressing, a squatting, or a compound pulling variation in a while, or you do it maybe once every 2 weeks or something like that, you're probably in for a real rough time when it comes to time to transition to real powerlifting training and step on the platform. You should never get away from heavy, hardcore, compound pushes, pulls, and squats, ever. You do that, you will experience firsthand the violation of the specificity principle, and it's not pretty.